Greetings and welcome everyone to yet another Creative Outlet podcast. It's episode number 25. We're a quarter of the way to 100 in just about, 3.5 years, give or take. My name is Brandon Pudwill. I am your host, and man, I'm kind of getting sick of these long periods between the last recording and now. Now, to be fair, this period wasn't quite as long, which is good. You know, I gave my first impressions of the Super Mario Brothers movie in late April, and then I recorded the last episode right after, but I just kind of sat on editing it, and you know, it wasn't even so much for the editing aspect, because during the moment I was kind of like, man, this is like one of the most in-depth for the podcast video projects I've had to do. It really wasn't that bad at the end when I did it, I realized, so I suspect I won't be sitting quite as long on this one, which is good because I need to not sit on these. But really, the annoying thing was like the writing. And by the time I'd finished that last episode, or well, I guess by the time we finished the last episode, you know, you and I as the audience here, we had 16 tracks to go. And I've added another 20 or so pages to this document because I had a 50-page document already at the time, and that was just that actually had waves 1, 2, and 3. I really only had to write wave 4. But that's what we're here to do today, is complete the tier list that I started last time for the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass as best as I can, focusing on waves 3 and 4 of the tracks in that pass. And then of course, that means there's going to be a third episode in this boosting series where I review the final 16 courses, the courses in waves 5 and 6 of the Booster Course Pass. But for now, we're here for waves 3 and 4. But before we get into that, being that it's been a little over a month, I do have a few news topics that I want to touch on. For one, Pac-Man 99 is already going down. I don't know how familiar people are with it, but Pac-Man 99 was one of the free games that you could get on Nintendo Switch Online after Super Mario Bros. 35 had gone down. It's essentially a Pac-Man take on Tetris 99. I know, what a shocking description, given that it's called Pac-Man 99. And, you know, I know folks like Pat and Ian were kind of down on the game. I would say of the 3 free Switch Online, what's the word for them? Battle Royale games, that's the phrase I'm looking for. Pac-Man 99 is more than likely my least favorite, but nonetheless, I can't say that I'm not sad to see it go. You will be able to still download the DLC at this point. Hopefully it just goes on sale for a while, because obviously people aren't going to be able to play the game in the way that it was intended to be played. But, you know, that's the passage of time. And it's barely been, 2-3 years that the game's been out? So it must not have been a big moneymaker for Namco Bandai Nintendo. And I mean, it must have been like the least played of the 99 series. I mean, not that there's a lot of games to compare it to, since it's only Tetris 99 or Super Mario Bros. 35, and obviously Super Mario Bros. 35 went down first, since it was only ever intended to be a limited product, which is its own little bit of ridiculousness, but we can get into that another time. But still, regardless, sad to see it go. I'll have to put in a couple more rounds into the game before it goes. Maybe I'll download the DLC, but like I said, I hope it goes on sale, because I never bought the Tetris 99 DLC because I'm already paying $20 a year at minimum for regular Switch Online. I mean, I'm paying $50, although to be fair, I did get it for free, but that's a whole separate situation that we don't need to get into right now either, for the Switch Online expansion pack. So, I mean, I feel like for the expansion pack, the least they could have done is, you know, bundled in the Tetris 99 DLC along with the DLC for the other games they bundled in, but alas, that is not the world that we live in. Some other things that have gone on. Recently we had Sony announce PlayStation's Project Q, and I just want to ask, why? I don't understand it quite as a product. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not really going to get that deep into it today. I just want to let folks really know that it's on my radar, because I think this is something that I'm going to make a topic in the next episode, because the most that I know about it right now is that it seems to be a handheld unit that's compatible with the PlayStation 5, that's got 4 hours of battery life, that uses the remote play feature. So you can't actually play games directly on it. You need to use remote play. So in other words, you need to already have a PlayStation 5. But like I said, I want to do some more research into it to really understand, like, okay, what is remote play? Is this really all it can do? I mean, for sure, it seems like my understanding is that it can't natively play games, and to me that seems like a big issue, but like I said, plan on this being a topic in episode 2026, but this is something that's on my radar, and I wonder, why, Sony? Why? I mean, you've got the lineage with the PSP and the PS Vita, which didn't do very well, and you're trying again, but it seems like this is the most half-hearted attempt, so alas. I hope that's not going to be the word of this episode. I've had plenty of words that are the word of the episode, I guess, but I'm hoping alas is not the one for today, so I suppose I'm going to try avoiding it now. We also have this little Dolphin/Steam debacle that's going on, and this will more than likely also be a topic in the next episode, because I'd really like to do more thorough research on the timeline of events here. Before I really make a take, but I want you folks to know again that I know about that there's this controversy going on with the Dolphin emulator, which is a GameCube and Wii emulator that was trying to get onto Steam, and it had a Steam page and everything, and then it's gotten into a whole debacle between Valve and Nintendo and the developers of Dolphin, and now it's not on there anymore, but as usual, even with what little I do know, I feel like I have a pretty nuanced take on it compared to others who are just like, it's totally right for Valve and Nintendo to take it down because it's copyright. And then the other people who are like, the whole thing is dumb and it should just be on there. But I want to do more research into it before I really land on, like, this is my take. And odds are I'm probably going, between the two opinions, I'm probably going to lean more toward the second one, but it's not like the first one doesn't have any merit whatsoever. I need to present that side as well. We also have some recent game reveals and updates. Today, in fact, June 12th, and I mean, literally at the time I'm recording this, it's 3:41 p.m. Central Time at this moment, so in a matter of a couple hours, there is going to be a new Capcom showcase airing later today, and Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is supposed to be part of it. I didn't plan this, but I am wearing my new Ghost Trick shirt that I got from the Yeti, so it ended up being very appropriate that the Ghost Trick presentation would be today. And like the previous showcase that I covered 2 years ago with my E3 special, that was the one that delved into the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, which, side note, I did also just finish that game, and I have some thoughts on it, but that's not really relevant for this discussion right now, but I'm sure at some point we will get into my opinions on the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles and the individual games in it. But like the previous presentation that I said, this showcase is going to cover games that Capcom seems to have pre-selected, so my guess is that since we know Ghost Trick is there, and it isn't an Ace Attorney game, but it's definitely an Ace Attorney adjacent game, given that it's Shoot Takumi's other baby. So I greatly doubt, even if it wouldn't be his team anyway, that more than likely that there would be any sort of Ace Attorney 7 reveal there too. And I also just think a reveal like that, aside from the fact that it, probably wouldn't make sense to have two Ace Attorney type games in the Capcom showcase. I think a reveal like that would just cannibalize the momentum that Ghost Trick has right now. So, unless Capcom's like, man, that Ghost Trick Phantom Detective that came out in 2011 on the DS didn't do real well. Let's just set it up for the Switch and Xbox One, PS4, and Steam versions to not do well either by announcing another game in the series that the people who would be most likely to consume this also like. So, like I said, unless Capcom really wants their game to do worse, it just makes sense to hold off on that. But hopefully, we hear something soon on that, but we shall see. As usual, there wasn't much interesting for my game types at the recently aired Summer Game Fest, but there is one that did hit, and that is the reveal of new Super Sonic Brothers Wii. Sonic Superstars. And yeah, obviously the joke there is that this is a new 2D Sonic game that borrows a lot from the new Super Mario Bros. Wii game, only like 14 years too late, because it's a new classic style Sonic game with everything 3D modeled and with 4-player co-op where you can play as Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, or Amy Rose, which again, doesn't that sound kind of familiar to a certain other Mario game from 2009? And I want to be clear, I'm intrigued with this game. I picked up Sonic Mania, Jesus, probably 2018, maybe 2019, whenever Sonic Mania Plus came out. And that was despite me not loving classic Sonic. So I'm willing to keep giving it shots because I want to find the classic Sonic game that's for me because I like the idea of classic Sonic. But I hope Superstars is going to be that game, but I'm not sure if the team behind it is going to get the physics right since it's in a new engine. I'm not sure. There's really no indication that my Chaos Emerald / special stage problem has been resolved. In fact, it's pretty clear that there are special stages for sure, so I guess we can pretty much say it won't be resolved. But we don't know what the stage will be like. And though I likely won't get to experience it, I don't know, man. I don't know what 4-player co-op 2D Sonic looks like. I mean, if New Super Mario Bros. Wii was chaos enough, and that's in comparison to classic Sonic, a much simpler, much less chaotic 2D game as is. Like, I don't know. I feel like 4-player co-op Sonic just can't. I don't think it can work. But I'm glad they're giving it a shot. The least they can do is try. And now I should also mention there is about 10 minutes of Sonic Superstars gameplay out there review, and I did take a look at it. And yeah, Sonic Superstars looks like classic Sonic, all right. I'd really like to get impressions more from like some diehard fans that I trust. I'm talking about like Johnny, but I'm not convinced on the physics yet. If they get the physics right, I'm sure it'll be good, but we'll just have to wait and see. It comes out in fall 2023, so there's not much time. There was also an interview on Sonic Superstars with Takashi Iizuka where he noted that they did have talks with Christian Whitehead and other collaborators that had worked on Sonic Mania like Headcanon, but those talks fell through. So I'm hoping that if there's any kind of issues with Christian Whitehead or Headcanon or anyone else that was involved with Sonic Mania and either Sonic Team or Sega right now, that they can patch up what went wrong, because as far as I'm concerned, Whitehead and his pals, they're the classic Sonic geniuses of the modern day. And I think it would be a shame if they never got to work on the series again, because they're doing some really good work on it. But I also have to give credit for Iizuka and the folks at Sega for even going to them first, even though it didn't work out, because I think they kind of get that, yeah, we don't have the absolute perfect pristine track record we need to have with Sonic games, and especially classic ones get looked over in fine detail, so going to them when they did it so well with Sonic Mania was a good choice. But like I said, hopefully if there is something wrong, they patch it up, because I think they could make some really good stuff in the future, especially if they were able to do like Sonic Superstars is doing, and instead of reusing classic zones like they had to in Sonic Mania, getting to make a full, brand new, completely like from the ground up 2D Sonic game, since that's part of what they're going for here. Now, they did reveal that the developers on this game is Naoto Oshima's team at Arzest, and that's something that gives me mixed emotions, because on the one hand, it's good that a member of the core original Sonic team, that being Naoto Oshima himself, since he was only the designer of the character, and as Iizuka noted, he designed some of the levels in Sonic 1 and Sonic CD, so it's great that he's involved on paper. On the other hand, Arzest doesn't really have the best track record with some of their games. And two of them that stick out from their catalog, which just so happen to also be 2D platformers, are Yoshi's New Island, which that's a game that I was excited for because Yoshi's Island DS was my first DS game, and that was developed by Artoon, which is Oshima's previous studio. But that game left me, like New Island specifically, that game left me pretty deflated. I don't even know if I got out of the first world in that game because it was so boring. And I should also point out Arzest also developed Hey Pikmin, which I did recently pick up. And while, I can't say I've adored Hey Pikmin, I do like it considerably more than Yoshi's New Island. So the fact that Arzest is working on it again, there's some good stuff there, but overall it leaves me kind of wary. But I will remain optimistic since we've had some good impressions. But on the topic of Pikmin, though, of course, the update you've all expecting me to give, since I'm so excited for it, is the fact that we received a new trailer for Pikmin 4. And, it's June 12th. We're getting a T-minus 6 weeks here, folks. I'm going to be holed up here on July 21st, just, throwing all kinds of Pikmin all over the place, taking down some walls, and getting into this new story stuff that we know about. And so the first thing that we're told is that indeed Captain Olimar himself is involved, and he's crashed on the planet again. Poor guy just cannot catch a break with crashing on the planet of the Pikmin. But, that itself is kind of the crux of the story, because Olimar, in his infinite wisdom, actually sent out a distress signal this time, and that was sent to the team that the player is a part of, which is what I would think of as a very generically named team called the Rescue Corps. So this clears up what I would consider to be the main collectible in Pikmin 4, which are, of course, Olimar being the final, sort of the main goals to rescue Olimar, but you also, those other unknown castaways that they mentioned must be other members of the Rescue Corps, because the trailer also mentions rescuing other members of the Rescue Corps, because it turns out the other Rescue Corps members also crash landed, and the player is the last member left to save them all. Beyond that, we didn't really learn a ton more plot-wise, but we did learn that the playable captain is actually an avatar character. So all my critiques that I had last time I talked about this, where I was like, I don't really like the playable character design. I liked it a lot more from the back, but from the front, I really don't like it. But all those critiques of that captain being ugly, they're now moot, because they can more or less be marked off. Now, I still don't like that specific design for the captain, but, I can make one that I do like. And I saw other designs in the trailer that I did like, so. Now, this could further suggest that this does mean Pikmin 4 is returning to a single captain gameplay style, which is something I'm kind of torn on. I really like the strategy of managing 3 captains like in Pikmin 3. And as I mentioned when Pikmin 4 was first revealed, and I talked about it on here, I really, really loved the Go Here feature for it. Being able to just remotely control my captains made me real happy. It made me actually be able to multitask. So going back down to one captain, I think, could feel like a step back. But on the other hand, I think that does leave a feather in Pikmin 3, and I guess more broadly, since it's going to be more popular on Switch, Pikmin 3 Deluxe's cap, which is something that I recall I wanted Splatoon 3 to leave for Splatoon 2. Splatoon 3 needed to make sure that there was still a good reason to play Splatoon 2. Pikmin 4 would leave a good reason to continue playing Pikmin 3, because if you have Pikmin 4 and it's all one captain, that's a very different experience from playing Pikmin 3 with your multiple captains. Now, not that I really want to go into that big Splatoon 3, Splatoon 2 discussion again, but I think you kind of get the idea here. The point is, I think Pikmin 4 is doing what Splatoon 3 should have done, but didn't really do. Now, the Japanese version of the official website is also up now, and it includes some more images and some footage of the game, including some more enemies. It also has profiles on the other characters of the game, Shepard and Colin, which folks have been trying to machine translate to learn more about. And now, personally, I'm going to wait for the official localization, whenever that comes, to really say, this is what the characters are like. I think some of the revelations from the website with the machine translation are interesting. Things like that the planet that some of the characters are from is supposedly named Kagia, or however exactly it would end up being pronounced. And there's been some suggestion that the shepherd character uses masculine pronouns, and like I said, that's all interesting, but it's possible that because machine translation like that on Google Translate's still pretty primitive, that these revelations might not be what the development team actually means. It could be the case that that Google Translate is just putting syllables together that form Kaguya, and really what they want to go for is something different. Plus, even then, some of these aspects can merely change in the localization by the decision of the localization team. After all, in English, the star enemy of the Pikmin series is not a Chappie, it is a Bulborb. Yes, it is a Chappie in the Japanese version of the game, but here in the West, we know it as a Bulborb. Similarly, yes, in North America, we know the enemy is a Wollywog, but in Europe, or specifically for sure in the British version, it's a Wollyhop. And I'm sure the name for the enemy in the Japanese version isn't either of those. So, these elements can change, but still, maybe these elements could be correct in the final translation. We only have about 6 weeks to find out. So like I said, interesting. It would be good, for example, for Nintendo to branch out into more LGBT characters in their games. And I suppose it would be particularly apt right now since it is June and it is Pride Month. But, if that isn't what the development team means, that isn't what they mean. And we will find out when the game gets to release. So, that is what it is. And that should really cover everything that I wanted to cover in this opening section here. So let's get on with the Booster Course Pass rankings for this episode. I'm really hoping this is going to be a shorter experience. We're already about 22 minutes in. We'll see how it goes. So let's get on with that ranking and a brief reminder of the aspects that I'm considering thus far. We're gonna consider the history with the track, if it's applicable. If I don't have history with the track because it's truly new to me, it doesn't really matter. Consider how well the track innovates while maintaining its faithfulness to the original version. That's more so for the console tracks. Of course, the Tour City tracks, they are specifically going for a new thing. So when it comes for innovation, I'm trying to see how they build on each other. We're going to talk about the track layout, the visuals, and I'm going to consider the auditory experience with the music. So with that all out of the way, we're going to start with Wave 3, London Loop. And London Loop, this is a track that I really, really want to like so much more, but I don't like it. In theory, I think London Loop would be an interesting track. I really like the idea of an English track with English landmarks. We're talking Big Ben and the London Eye, but the execution to me it kind of left something to be desired. And the really sad thing is that I think for me, a lot of London Loop's just boringness just kind of comes down to the sound design. And while I consider things like the music to be a pretty important factor in the track, I don't want to let that impact the grade too much. There's plenty of Mario Kart tracks that are fun that I don't think have amazing music. Airship Fortress, that's a super fun track in Mario Kart DS and Mario Kart 7, but I would not put its song in my top 10 Mario Kart songs. And not to spoil things from an upcoming entry, but another Mario Kart DS track, funnily enough, Peach Gardens, I don't really love its music, but I think this incarnation of the track is great. Yoshi Valley, that reuses the song from Moo Moo Farm, which I think is an okay song in Mario Kart 64, but I adore the track. I think it's a brilliant track, and it's actually one of the tracks that I would say, as a whole, I prefer in the N64 version, purely because the console it doesn't know what's going on, so everybody is question marks. You have no idea who's really in first during the course of the race. Now, London Loop, though, it just has an entirely generic rock riff for its song, and it doesn't really leave an impression on me one way or another. Maybe it is reminiscent of like 60s or 70s English rock, but I don't know, something about it just doesn't click with me. And I also don't think the layout for this track really leaves a big impression either. And something I should have been pointing out with many of these city tracks along the way is that the individual laps oftentimes is not fully every single time, but oftentimes they are full versions that are the track in Mario Kart Tour. So in Mario Kart Tour, there's London Loop 1 and London Loop 2 and London Loop 3. So lap 1 in this track, you just drive straight and then take mostly right turns before jumping or crossing a bridge back to the start. That's London Loop 1 in Mario Kart Tour. The second lap where you go straight and continue that way from the start, then drive around a park. One's probably a landmark in London that I don't know. To take a couple more winding turns, eventually going by the London Eye back to start. That's London Loop 2. Whereas lap 3 is a little bit different in that it amalgamates that lap with another variant of Tour. And that's just a reverse of London Loop 3. It starts the same with players driving through the park, but instead of going left after the statue that you pass, which, again, probably another landmark I should know, you instead go straight and drive on the waterfront past the London Eye, and you cross the same bridge from lap 1. Though instead of continuing on lap 1's path, you end up on the other side of the river that the London Eye is on and make a right turn back to the finish. It sounds a lot more complicated than previous city tracks, which that's really what I wanted, but that complexity to me doesn't really translate into satisfaction. I watched over the replay from the race I did for this review, and I just don't get excited watching it. And I know that's anticlimactic to not be able to describe why you don't like something, but something about London Loop just doesn't jive with me. On the visuals, I like the foggy aesthetic that London has because London is known for its fog, but outside of that, nothing sticks out to me about London Loop visually as great. But I can't really cite any graphical issues I would have with it either, which, hey, that's a huge plus. I guess I'm not sitting here being like, man, that area is kind of under-textured. That model is not as detailed as it could be. That one's bad. Right, by Wave 3, it seems like a lot of the earlier visual issues kind of went away, but for the most part, I also don't think the visuals have improved to the base tracks here. I'm going to place London Loop in the C tier. It's going to go between Mario Circuit 3 and New York Minute. This track's complexity is at least makes it more exciting for me than New York Minute, but again, I want to like it more. Maybe it'll be a track that just the more I play it, eventually it'll click with me, but something about it right now just doesn't hit the mark. Boo Lake from Mario Kart Super Circuit. And folks, if you thought I was harsh on Snowland, I'm going to be just as harsh on this one. As far as I'm concerned, Boo Lake is an abysmally bad track for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And like many previous Boo tracks, for whatever reason, it's made of almost entirely 90-degree turns, and it's shaped kind of like a box. This would be another good one. I probably have pulled up the map for London Loop. I don't think I really need to do that with every track because some of them I've described in pretty good detail. Boo Lake is one that I think really could use it. But it's kind of shaped like a box. And I can give Boo Lake one really good major point of innovation from its original version, I should say. Being that this is Boo Lake, it actually has water, and there's a large portion of the track that takes place underwater. Wow, you've got a lake track where you go underwater. And so in that sense, you could argue that this remake evokes the original track better since it incorporates the lake idea of Boo Lake. You take a right turn to a straightaway of a couple ramps, then turn right to the tiniest fork in the road, which converges on the dock, suddenly ramping upwards to start using anti-gravity. So that's another good point. It's using anti-gravity. I wanted to see more tracks doing it, so I'm glad to see that Boo Lake is using anti-gravity. That then becomes a sharp turn, which, to be fair, I don't know if that sharp turn could have been accomplished outside of anti-gravity mode, so it was good to have it there. You then jump in the water for a sharp left turn and then a longer loop, which then angles upward for a couple of ramps toward the finish line. Do that 3 times and come in first. And, this track, it's just so uninteresting. Yes, I think those new systems give Boo Lake some extra complexity, which is good. But nothing about Boo Lake really screamed to me, Boo's scream, that it really needed to be remade. And, worse still, I just praised the graphics in London Loop, right? I thought the graphics in London Loop were fine, but I think this track and the next one are a pretty major step backwards, and maybe it's just me. But the texture on the dock, which is to say the road, to me it really does look like it's textured on. Like when I feel like I'm looking at the dock, I feel like I'm looking at a rectangular prism object with a wood texture plastered on it, instead of, oh, that's a piece of wood. That's what I should be thinking, is that is a piece of wood, not thinking like that's a rectangle that somebody extruded in a 3D modeler and they put wood texture on it. And again, that's a really bad thing. But beyond that, I think the lights look okay. The water is good. I think the skybox is kind of underwhelming. It does channel the original track's look, but I think that the dense clouds over the most of the track do a bit of a disservice to Mario Kart 8's lighting engine. And the best part of the background is the part that faces the house, but, because that's the area that has the best lighting, but you barely get to see that portion. It's pretty much at the start, and then you go around the whole rest of the track and you can't see it, and then when you make it back to the start, you get to see the house again, but then it goes away, so that's a shame there. But if anything, I can say the music is at least passable. I don't think it's like some toe-tapping, hummable hit, but frankly, unpopular opinion, I do think Boo Lake's song is better than Twisted Mansion's song. I'm really not a big fan of Twisted Mansion in the base game either. It's not a track that really gets me super excited either. And but I do like playing it better than Boo Lake, even if I don't adore the music there. I think I'm going to have to put this track in the D tier. It's going to go just above Sky Garden. That's the only track so far that's actively let me down as someone who's a fan of earlier incarnations, but geez, I'd still rather play Toad Circuit and Snowland before I pick Boo Lake. Rock Mountain, also known as Alpine Pass in PAL regions. A lot of P sounds. Hopefully I'm not making a lot of plosives on the microphone. And the way I felt about Rock Mountain, I feel, is actually pretty similar to the way I felt about Mushroom Gorge. Rock Mountain was in my rotation of tracks from Mario Kart 7. I would pick it when playing online, but it's not in the top tier of tracks that I wanted to see revisited for this DLC. And there's only one change made to this track, and that's the final push before the finish line is now an anti-gravity section. And again, points for including it. Wave 1 had no anti-gravity. Wave 2 only had anti-gravity in Sky High Sunday, and I think it could be argued pretty well that it was kind of shoehorned in there. But I think with this track specifically, if they were going to include anti-gravity, they picked the smart place to put it. So points for using anti-gravity and using it intelligently. And like I said, honestly, even then, it's not really that creative of a use. But then again, there are ways that I think anti-gravity is used in the base game that's pretty obvious too, so I can't knock it points for being not the most creative. And I guess in that sense, you could argue that the track is at least faithful if the only major change to it from a gameplay standpoint is that anti-gravity is in the final push before the finish line. Now remember, originally this track was in the Flower Cup in Mario Kart 7, so it's actually a fairly simple track. And I feel like as a nitro track in that game, it does a good job of showing off the glider idea in Mario Kart 7. But as a piece of DLC for a later game that reused the idea, I feel like Rock Mountain comes off as kind of rudimentary. You start by taking a right turn, then you drive straight into a cave that winds for a little bit, and then from there you take a ramp onto a flight pad where if you want, you could drop down to the road below quickly and follow its winding but ultimately just straight ahead path, or you can continue flying ahead as far as possible before landing when you have to. Either way, you're going to hit the ground eventually, and that leads to another flight pad, you're going to turn right and then drive up that final push with rocks coming down on a mountain while you're in anti-gravity, and there's some spinning obstacles there to do the spin boosts. And then you hit the flight pad, but the drop-off from the cliff there is a lot shorter, like I said. Or actually, no. I'm forgetting. Actually, from the path before that right turn to the anti-gravity section, there is another flight pad with a much shorter drop on the cliff. I meant to include that in there, but I'm realizing I forgot that as well. And then I guess I should point out on that last flight path before the finish line, after you've gone up the anti-gravity section, you can either just drop down right away and basically drive the same way as in lap 1, or you can use it to fly across, take a sort of shortcut across the turns, and then there's at least a pipe that should have some air flowing out of it to get all the way up there. And I think when I describe that, it's a track that sounds a lot more interesting on paper than it ends up being. You know, the idea of driving along a mountain and flying out of it to drive back up, like that sounds really cool. But when so much of the track is in practice just straightaway, I think it comes off as pretty static. Of course, the tracks of the tracks in this group, you know, this specific cup, I also think that Rock Mountain is the other contender for the graphically weakest track. I think Boo Lake is worse overall, but man, some of the textures in this track, they look pretty similar to Wave 1 Toad Circuit textures. And what a coincidence, it's the other Mario Kart 7 track in this group that's like that. I think the rocks, and especially the wood and the leaves in this track, they look unimpressive. Like, there's definitely texture in them, but in motion, it's just so hard to tell. You know, the grass, it looks like it's painted on again instead of actually looking like grass. So this is a pretty major step down. And then kind of similar to London Loop, I feel like Rock Mountain, or maybe I should say Alpine Pass for a change for my pal friends out there. I think it's just a pretty generic guitar riff. I think on the whole, I find Rock Mountain to be catchier than London Loop, but man, it's far from the first song I would pick in a playlist of Mario Kart songs. But the ironic thing, though, is I think a lot of these aspects are also true about the original incarnation of Rock Mountain. You know, the graphics problem isn't there, but all the rest of the critiques hold true for that version. Now, I find placing this one pretty tricky. Do I put it above Coconut Mall in C tier because I find it unimpressive? Or do I place it at the bottom of B tier because despite all those flaws, I'd pick it sooner than any of the tracks below it? This is a begrudging choice, but I'm going to put it at the bottom of the B tier. At the end of the day, I find Rock Mountain unexciting, but I don't quite find it boring. I can have a fun, quick race on Rock Mountain, but geez, there's probably 10 other options I would pick before it, just in this pass alone, especially now that the novelty has worn off of it, or for sure of some of the weaker ones. Maple Treeway. Now, here's a track that, on the other hand, I adored, and I did not have it ruined by overexposure. Maple Treeway is one of those tracks that, even though it got picked all the time online in Mario Kart Wii and all the time in Mario Kart 7, it was constantly saved by the gorgeous autumn visuals, and even more so by Maple Treeway's sublime soundtrack. Yeah, I can't tell you how good I think Maple Treeway's music is. It's so good. It's so cozy. It's so catchy. I love it. But the real question here is, does this DLC version hold up to the hype? Now, spoilers, I'm gonna say no, but that's only because I think the original Maple Treeway, it had an insanely high bar to me. I love that version. Now, I do think this version of Maple Treeway is solid, but it does have some flaws that make it be like, this is probably second place or maybe third place, even below Mario Kart 7's. It's not one of my favorites, but it's, at the end of the day, it's still Maple Treeway, and I love Maple Treeway, so I will still definitely be picking it. Kind of a weird metaphor incoming. I feel like this version of Maple Treeway is kind of like getting a substitution in your groceries. You know, there's a particular Maple Treeway out there that's my gold standard. That's the Mario Kart Wii version. And I would want that Maple Treeway above all others. But it's not like this version is inferior, it's just a different version of of something good. It's kind of like how, there's a particular product that you might want at the store and you think it's the best version of that product for you. But a different brand of that same kind of product, it's not bad. It's just different. I hope that metaphor kind of makes sense here. But, that's sort of the way I'm envisioning it. This butter is the butter I like the most, but that other butter, it's not bad, but it's not the version I would pick first. That's sort of what I'm saying. And anyway, I guess we should move on to talking about the track instead of me trying to fumble around this metaphor. Now, out of the gate, there is a fantastic innovation I want to point out that this version of Maple Treeway started for the Booster Course Pass. And it's that it finally brought half pipes back to console Mario Kart. Now let me explain. Mario Kart Wii implemented half pipes on some walls for players to trick off of, and they would get item boxes in midair doing that. Or, they would just get a trick off of it and get a boost. That feature was removed from Mario Kart 7, and then no tracks in Mario Kart 8 had it either. Now, I should say there are tracks in Mario Kart Tour that had it. So that's why I point out that this is console, sort of like mainline, not the mobile Mario Kart game, is my point. Now, where in Mario Kart Wii, these were blue ramps that were marked trick off, in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, these are anti-gravity ramps. So tricking off of these anti-gravity ramps that are at the edges of walls, like the half pipes, without any ground to attach to, that causes the vehicle to pull back toward the ground. Thus, it acts like the half pipes in Mario Kart Wii. And this innovation is it's extra ingenious because it adds to the Booster Course Pass and it adds to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe while also being faithful to the original game. You're getting a feature back that could have been in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I think it really should have been in Mario Kart 8 as is, but we didn't get it. But now Maple Treeway finally brought it back, so that makes me super happy. And again, it's faithful to the original version. Like I said, the Maple Treeway in Mario Kart 7, it didn't have it because Mario Kart 7 didn't have the half pipes. But now in Mario Kart 8, you have them again, and that's amazing. I'm sort of persuading myself now that this version should be the second place version, the more I'm describing this. And, I think the layout for Maple Treeway is phenomenal, too. You start by either winding under a tree, or you take a path slightly off to the right with a mushroom that's, more direct toward a barrel cannon that shoots into another tree. You drive across a couple of branches, one that's a sharp right turn, then next a longer left turn that leads to the top of a tree with a couple of giant wigglers walking around. That then leads to a sharp turn toward a slight left with 3 boost pads and a sharp right where players can either take that right immediately or use the anti-gravity strip to jump for coins and an item. That gives way to a narrow hall with a jump for some more items and a quick left turn to a flight ramp toward the finish line. Though that wide is the word I was looking for, that wide area towards the finish line, it branches off with a couple of trees with boosts and items to take off to the right and left, or you can go straight ahead and trick off some of the roots of the trees. And graphically, what can I say about this track? I think Maple Treeway is a large improvement over the last couple of tracks. I think I would have liked to see some slightly better leaves for the background trees, and I think the area with the wigglers looks more like felt, like actual felt texture than it looks like leaves. But if those are my biggest issues, I think that Maple Treeway overall is a winner. And on the music, I like the remix, but the original Maple Treeway song is always going to have my heart. For a re-instrumentation in the Mario Kart 8 style, though, can't lie, they did really well. They did really good on Maple Treeway. It's fantastic. Maple Treeway holds up, but since the team impressed me more with one of the tracks that's going above this being so adventurous, and the other one taking a track that I felt very little about before it and making it amazing, I'm going to be placing Maple Treeway just below Shroom Ridge in the A tier. Alright, so that's Cup 1 down. On to Cup number 2, Berlin Byways. I feel like Maple Treeway started an upswing again, and Berlin Byways, God, it takes the Booster Course Pass to new heights. It's a phenomenal track. It continues to up the ante in complexity, which admittedly can be a double-edged sword. I know that there are many players who feel like they don't know where they're going when they play this course. And that's a legitimate issue. It isn't one that I've experienced beyond playing it for the first time, but I can see where the track might feel confusing. In the first lap, you drive along a short straightaway toward a roundabout, then turn left toward the Bahnhof. That's something I had to look up. I would not have known what the Bahnhof is, but I just happened to find it out here. Me and my uneducated Americanness about world landmarks. You then are going to take a couple of small turns along a river. The second lap starts mostly the same, except instead of taking the roundabout, you're going to take a left turn past what looks like a theater with some boulevards in the middle of the street. Most of the lap from there is just kind of a winding road, but the last section takes a couple of long turns, including through a park toward the finish line, except instead you're going in reverse from where you started on going. Whereas the last lap takes players past a womp-infested Berlin Wall, then around a building and back through the same park to the end of the race. Now, when I explain it like that, it probably doesn't sound that complicated, but if you look at the map, and again, this is a good time to pull up the map, without having played the race, it certainly does look like a winding city. And something I felt with a lot of these tracks in Wave 3 at first is I thought they weren't really improving graphically from the prior waves, but the more I've played Berlin Byways for sure, I don't really have any complaints with how it looks. With Wave 4 out, I'd now call it only the second best looking city. Actually, you know what? Actually, I'll come back to you on that. I think Berlin might be the best looking one, but I could see a certain city in Wave 4 looking better. But you know what? I regardless, it's up there in my estimation. And the music, man, the music in Berlin Byways, it's one of the best songs in Mario Kart 8. It's up there with Toad Harbor for me, and I love Toad Harbor. That was my favorite track and my favorite song in the base Mario Kart 8. But God, Berlin Byways, it's so good. I like the orchestral parts of the song better than the techno parts at the start personally, but I think, man, the genres, they just act as such a great contrast, and the tune itself, it's so good. It is hands down my favorite song of the Booster Course Pass. To this point, we still got 2 more waves to go. But I'm going to call this now. I'm going to give Berlin Byways the top spot in the S tier. It's going to go ahead of Sydney Sprint. It is number 1 for me to this point. We'll see if that changes. All right, Peach Gardens. Now prepare yourselves again, folks, for unpopular opinion territory. Peach Gardens is a track that in Mario Kart DS, but less so in Mario Kart Wii, definitely more in Mario Kart DS, I hated it. I did not like Peach Gardens, and a major part of that was all the times that I tried playing the Special Cup in DS, and I wanted to get first across the board, and if it wasn't Wario Stadium that screwed me over, it was Peach Gardens. Now, I may have loved Mario Kart DS, but I thought Peach Gardens was like a bottom-tier track. I am pleased to say, though, that in the Booster Course Pass, Peach Gardens has jumped up to a top-tier track. It's like, man, you talk about a face turn, Peach Gardens has really made that. Like, I want to talk about this track's innovation, but that's going to kind of require me to spoil the layout, so I'm gonna jump to that first before I get to the innovation here. Now, the map for Peach Gardens, it's actually pretty straightforward. You drive across a bridge and then take a left turn into the garden. Then you take a round path past some flowers. You then take a right turn into a hedge area that now has some nice topiaries of different characters. There's a Luigi topiary and a Peach topiary for sure. Another right turn from there takes you to a giant piranha plant in the middle of the road. It used to just be 3 hedges before, but now it's the giant piranha plant in a pipe. You simply drive around it and take the winding path while being careful to avoid the Monty moles popping out of the ground. And then another right turn from the castle gate there, and a lap is completed. You do that once more, and suddenly, Lap 3 takes a page from Calamari Desert. And this is why Peach Gardens jumped to a top tier track for me. It wasn't just a plain recreation like so many other tracks. This made a surprising reroute. As fun as Calamari Desert's changing route is, it's also referential. And in some ways, this is also referential because people wanted to know about this inaccessible area in the track. But now it's actually open. The lap starts as usual, but instead of turning right into the garden, you take a left through some hedges at where that round path is at the very start, and you drive through a new winding path toward the castle, and then you drive the rest of the course backwards. And then there's a new flight path or a new flight ramp, I guess I should say, that was added to the area with the topiary, so you have to fly through there instead of driving through it. The rest of the lap just kind of finishes as it would in reverse. And, I will say, I think this layout can suffer from Coconut Mall's problem with the running into walls during a drift in each of the areas when you exit the hedge or the topiary area. But beyond that, geez, I don't really have any complaints with this layout. I know there's some that are annoyed that you can't fully drive around the Mario topiary at the start of the track, but to me that's kind of small potatoes. Great, they put up a wall at the start so that you have to take the path instead of driving entirely around the Mario topiary, which wouldn't help you in any way. Whoop-de-doo, that doesn't matter to me. Graphically, I think Peach Gardens is a solid track. Of the 4 in this cup, I would call it the weakest, but overall, I think Peach Gardens look nice, so I can't really complain about it. I would say the music's about the only sticking point. Otherwise, I think Peach Gardens' song is fine. There's never really been an incarnation of it that I thought was great, but this one at least uses some real instrumentation. I'm going to be placing Peach Gardens above Paris Promenade, but it's going to go just below Maple Tree Way in the A tier. And that was a tough choice to make. I really like what the team did with Peach Gardens, but if I'm presented with any of the 4 tracks that are above it, Sydney Sprint, Berlin Byway, Shroom Ridge, or Maple Tree Way, I'm probably picking one of them before Peach Gardens, but man, this is a good track. Maybe I'd pick this over Maple Tree Way, but overall I'd prefer the others first. Merry Mountain. Now, Wave 3 of the Booster Course Pass released a few weeks before Christmas, so this Christmas track from Mario Kart Tour was added. Now, outside of a certain remaining track in this cup, I'd call Merry Mountain the most underwhelming track. I think it's fine, but for one of the first explicitly holiday tracks in Mario Kart, I think it could have been a lot better. And a major piece of its underwhelming status is the layout. You take a couple of turns, right? And to be fair, at the start, you do have a little bit of choice in that you can either follow the ground path or you can take a train track ramp upwards. But these paths ultimately lead to the same snowy path at the top of the mountain with a couple of short turns, culminating in an anti-gravity section at the very top of the mountain, where you can either use another half pipe to get a double item box or get another half pipe. That's good. Continue using those. I think it's a good thing that they're back. Or you can just sharply turn through a ring of single item boxes. That section ends with a ramp to the finish, and then on laps 2 and 3, that ramp also has a flight ramp. And I think the problem, if I really boil it down, is that Merry Mountain seems like it's going for a very climactic feel without having the track layout to accompany it. And it doesn't help to actually... It doesn't have to actually be like the Bowser's Castle of this cup in difficulty. That's not what I'm saying. But what I wish it was like a Bowser's Castle in complexity. And instead, I feel like Merry Mountain is just kind of a mountainous, very tall circuit track. It feels like it ends before it really hits the crescendo that it needs to. Graphically, again, I tried looking through it to really find some, but I don't really have that many complaints. Maybe if you look at the buildings and like some of the other materials like the wood, it doesn't quite meet the mark for being a base game track visually, but of the Wave 3 tracks, I think Merry Mountain is the one that comes the closest to looking like a base game track. And the song, it reminds me of the kind of song you would hear toward the end of a Christmas movie. It's trying to be adventurous yet reminiscent of the holidays with things like the bells and the accordion, but
I think it's really the violins that get me as far as like the holiday-y feel. Honestly, I think Merry Mountain was on the right track with that though. What I really want is for it to go even more bombastic. And really, if I had to summarize Merry Mountain into a sentence, it would be that. This track tries hard to seem like this is a big, bombastic holiday track, but it just doesn't go far enough in execution to meet that vision. Merry Mountain, it's going to go just above Rock Mountain in the B tier. If I want a simple time, I'll pick Merry Mountain, but I was really excited for it, but it's not often a track that I'm seeking out to play. So in that sense, I was kind of disappointed by that. Oh boy, here we go. Rainbow Road 3DS. Rainbow Road 3DS. If it wasn't the lack of a versus mode that to me made Mario Kart 7 one of my least favorite Mario Kart games, definitely my least favorite post-DS Mario Kart game, it was this track. And I'm ready for the flamethrowers out there from anyone who sees or hears this, but Mario Kart 7's Rainbow Road, it might well be my least favorite one of all. I mean, I don't know. I really don't like the original N64 Rainbow Road either, but that's only really because it's a 6-minute track. If it weren't for that, it'd be fine. But Mario Kart 7, God. Like, the problem, I think, is that I had some high expectations for this track when I first played it. You know, this is the Rainbow Road that followed what I consider to be an amazing Rainbow Road in Mario Kart Wii. And it had the 3-section idea that I adored in Woohoo Loop and Maka Woohoo from earlier in Mario Kart 7. And this track just disappointed. Where the Rainbow Road in Mario Kart Wii, it's fast, it's exhilarating, and it had a magical song. This Rainbow Road, it's slow, it's plodding, and it remixed Mario Kart 64's Rainbow Road, which is a very mid-tier, blasé Rainbow Road song. It's very okay. Now, that's not to say I didn't like some parts of the track. Going on planets and the moon and the third section of this track, that was pretty good. But the first half of it, God, it's such a bore. So, you know, where everyone else out there, they were rejoicing like it was the second coming after this track was shown off. I can't say I was surprised that this Rainbow Road is coming back, but man, I was not excited. And to be clear, I like this version better than the original, but I am not a believer that 3DS Rainbow Road is the Rainbow Road to rule them all. Between both versions, there's only really one layout change to consider, and it's that the planet section now takes place in anti-gravity. Beyond that, it's the same layout as the original. You start by taking a bend around a planet, and then you jump a few ramps in a row before doing the same thing while encircling a small planet. Next follows a small turn to a jump on a mushroom that's somehow suspended in space, before a short turn with a small bit of a wavy road that finishes the first track section. The second section starts on another right turn to a flight ramp that lands on the rings of Saturn. You drive around on the rings, grabbing some coins, taking a couple of boosts, avoiding the pitfalls, before you fly back onto the road with a left turn on some boosts to another wavy section with holes. Either falling through the holes or getting to the end drops you on the anti-gravity planet, or I guess maybe it's the anti-gravity moon, I suppose I should say. You can then jump on different craters along the way to avoid the rolling chain chomps, but that ends the second section. The third section starts with some conveyor belts on a turn toward a rotating tube with some boosts in it, and that tube ends with a ring of boosts and flight paths, so you're either going to get out of the tube flying through some rings ahead, or split up on, or driving ahead on split up parts of the road, or I guess those are the only options, aren't they? Now, there's a couple of hairpin turns for one to the right and one to the left after that, and then the race is over. And for the life of me, I don't get the popularity of this Rainbow Road. Like, I'll give it credit. It's a unique Rainbow Road for sure. I think conceptually, it's genius. But, I I played this track twice. I played it in 200cc to be like, maybe I just need to play it in a faster speed. Maybe that'll be the thing that gets me to be a true believer. But I don't get the exhilaration I want from a Rainbow Road when I play this. I got the speed that I wanted when playing it in 200cc, but it lacks the antics of Wii's Rainbow Road or the set pieces of DS's Rainbow Road. Like, the planets are neat and all, but they're slow. I feel like a Rainbow Road is supposed to feel like a roller coaster, and 3DS Rainbow Road feels like a guided tour. And, I'll give this version credit. I think it's much prettier than the 3DS version. The more realistic lighting is gorgeous. The translucent track, that's a really nice touch. The planets look like planets, but they don't look like anything more. And, I do think the critique that some of the areas, despite being projected with light from the sun being dark, is fair, but, that doesn't really hurt it too badly in my estimation. But that song, man, it's just so boring. I think there's only one good remix of the 3DS Rainbow Road, and it's not even from Mario Kart. It's originally from Super Smash Bros. For 3DS, and it returned in the Wii U version, and it's in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. The way that remix increases the tempo, and it re-instruments the song, that works so much better for me. It also does help that since it is a part of a medley, it also includes the music from the DS Rainbow Road and even Super Circuit's Rainbow Road, but it's mostly Mario Kart 7 song. And that incarnation I love. I really like that incarnation of the Rainbow Road 3DS song. If I had to pick the versions, though, I'd probably pick the Booster Course Pass version before the 7 version, but it's got the same problem of being slow in an attempt to be magical. And we're really getting to the point in the list where I'm considering if I would pick particular tracks to play over others. And when I look at the rest of this list, I find myself placing it much higher than I would if I didn't find other tracks so disappointing. God, I'm going to put Rainbow Road just above Rock Mountain in the B tier. I'd rather play this Rainbow Road over 9 other tracks in the Booster Course Pass, but there's also 14 more tracks at this point in the process that I would play sooner in this Rainbow Road. So, everybody listening, give me the hate. I understand. I'm a heathen. I hate the best Rainbow Road, apparently. But as far as I'm concerned, very overrated, not that great. But hey, now that we've gone through that, hopefully you've decided to stick around to hear me talk about Wave 4, and we're starting with something recent in Wave 4. Like with Wave 3, I found myself playing a lot of these tracks for the first time, including the one that we're talking about first, which is Amsterdam Drift. And when I first played Wave 4, I thought a lot of it was good, but not great. My very first impressions of all of them were outside of Yoshi's Island and Singapore Speedway. I was like, this is really underwhelming. But the more I've played it, the more I've grown to love these tracks. But like I said, I don't adore them the way I really want to yet. And Amsterdam Drift to me is one of those tracks to a T. It's good. It's not great. I like it, but I don't love it the way I do other tracks. But the more I play it, though, the more I find myself liking it. Of the tracks in this wave, it's probably kind of in the middle. I'm thinking a 5th place spot, but I think on the whole, Wave 4 has a higher batting average than the other ones. But still, we'll need to see where they place in the list. And this is a tough track for me to grade because I find myself so mixed on all of its elements. Now, to be clear, there's nothing in Amsterdam Drift that I outright dislike. Nothing that I just file it as a purely negative aspect of this track. New York Minute, even though, I'd probably pick it sooner than Amsterdam Drift, it's got aspects of it that I think are purely negative. Amsterdam Drift, it doesn't have any of those. But it has so many elements that I'm mixed on that New York Minute ranks higher as a track choice to me because it has more purely positive aspects too the Amsterdam Drift just doesn't have. That they're all I don't know how to feel about it. But, one point that I can say unambiguously is positive for Amsterdam Drift is that it's an innovative track. This is the first city track of the 9 so far across the 4 waves that has an underwater section. The upcoming city tracks, they'll have some areas where you drive on shallow water, but this is the only city track where you actively use the underwater mechanic, so I can give it a gold star for that. As far as the layout goes, Amsterdam Drift has a lot of landmarks with highly distinct laps. Of course, there's some repetition because that is the nature of having tracks that travel through the same locales, but for the most part, areas are pretty distinct. You only fly past the windmills in lap 1. You only drive through the tulip patch in lap 3. There's a tiny portion of it repeated in lap 3, but lap 2 is more or less unique in that it takes place mostly underwater. The first lap starts with a small snake toward a flight ramp where you fly over your tram and between a couple of windmills onto a snaky dirt path with more windmills and what appears to be like a nice meadow with some houses. But I mean, man, that dirt road, it's infested with some Monty moles. A quick left to a couple of trick ramps on a boat brings you back to the city where you pass by a cable car, back to the starting line. The second lap starts with players continuing straight from where they previously turned left in lap 1 to jump into the river. Now this section consists mostly of straightaways, but there's a couple of wind gusts to jump out of the water onto a small boat and gusts coming from pipes at turns to push players on the right path. One of the straights toward the end of the lap has a trench in the middle, so you can drive on, I guess you would describe them as the walls that surround the trench. And then just one other right turn brings you back to dry land for lap 3. Whereas this lap takes the final direction off the starting lap area, and it's a right turn. So we've gone left, we've gone straight, now we're going right. And that leads mostly to a straightaway back to the small section of the underwater portion of lap 2, but now in reverse. So we got a little bit of Paris Promenade going on here with the track in reverse, which I also appreciate. There's a short left there through a pipe that leads to a ramp jumping out to a field of tulips. You wrap around the bend in the field, and then you take a couple more mostly right turns, and then the race is over. And this is another one of those where, on paper, writing that description, I think it makes the track seem more fun than it really is. And it's not nearly as bad, but I feel like Amsterdam Drift has some aspects of London Loop in it. I like a lot of the ideas here, but something about the execution just doesn't quite hit. And it's such a shame because I see Amsterdam Drift as having the potential that tracks like Berlin Byways and Sydney Sprint have, but it just doesn't meet that potential. On the graphics, there's some aspects of this track that I think look really nice, but some other come off as a step back, which is not good because Wave 3 seemed like it was getting close to the Mario Kart 8 base game standard. I mean, yeah, there's popsicle trees and there's ball-shaped bushes, but I kind of accepted those over time. But what makes me disappointed is seeing the basic textures coming back again. In theory, the buildings in Amsterdam Drift, they look good. But the stone texture, it looks like it's barely there. I should be able to clearly tell that this is a stone building. The tram and the windmills in lap 1, I feel like they lack texture, which is especially bad for the windmills case because Moo Moo Meadows from the base game, it has a windmill that looks gorgeous. But the big one for me, it's those tulips in lap 3. The tulips, they're an artistic part of the track that was shown off a bunch, and like I said, they're the main landmark of lap 3, but I think they look really bad. The tulip model and its textures, to me, they look like how they should look from far away, not close up. It's okay for games to have simple models or to have low texture models, but those are usually loaded to represent that object from afar, and then a better textured, a better modeled version is loaded as you get closer up to it. But it looks like they only made the far away model for these, so I mean, maybe it was an artistic choice to have this really simple looking tulip, but if that was the case, I don't think it paid off at all. But then there's things like the roads, there's the grass, there's the underwater area in lap 2. Those are all pieces that I think look pretty good, so we come back to me being torn. But on the whole, graphically, I gotta lean negative on Amsterdam Drift, and that only leaves us with the music. Have I said that I'm mixed enough? Because I'm gonna say it again here. because that's how this song makes me feel too. When I hear Amsterdam Drift, I like it. In fact, I think the song is just catchy enough where I found myself humming it a few times, but not nearly to the same extent that it did with Sydney Sprint, let alone Berlin Byways, or even a couple of the tracks coming up here. And I have to give Amsterdam Drift some brownie points for having unique instruments. Like, I'm fairly certain you don't hear the instruments used in its song pretty much anywhere else in the game. Like the song, it uses a mouth harp, for goodness sake. There's no song in Mario Kart 8 other than Amsterdam Drift that uses a mouth harp, and I think that's really, really cool. So I guess when I look at it critically, the music pretty much has the opposite appraisal from me for the graphics. I don't love the song, but I think it's got a bunch going for it where I have to lean positively on Amsterdam Drift's song, where the graphics I don't dislike, but they have so many flaws that I lean negatively on them. And God, writing this was an incredibly tough call to make. But I have to place Amsterdam Drift. I'm going with the slot between SNES Mario Circuit 3 and London Loop. I think the gap between those two tracks, between Mario Circuit 3 and London Loop, where Amsterdam Drift is going to grow. But this is where I think it sits right now. Going back to my intro on this track, I would probably pick New York Minute before Amsterdam Drift, but I probably wouldn't pick it before London Loop. But for as much as I can critique Amsterdam Drift, I think it's got more going for it than New York Minute. I can't say I have more fun with it than I do Mario Circuit 3, though. Mario Circuit 3, it's simple. It's got a lot of flaws, but I enjoy drifting around, going for the pink sparks in that track. I don't know if that gap between Amsterdam Drift and Mario Circuit 3 is going to grow. So it's more the gap between Amsterdam Drift and London Loop that I'm interested in. Looking at the tier list as a whole, I don't know if there's really ever going to be a spot that I was fully pleased with putting Amsterdam Drift in, but that's the one that feels the most right for me. Riverside Park. Here we have yet another Game Boy Advance track to go over. And we'll have to wait and see if there's going to be one in Waves 5 and 6, but geez, it seems like tracks coming from Mario Kart Super Circuit is just a consistent theme of the Booster Course Pass. And I'm going to get it out of the way. I still don't love Riverside Park, much how I feel about all the other tracks from Mario Kart Super Circuit so far, in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, I mean. But I did state in the last episode, or at least I wrote it down in my notes as something that I needed to point out. I did think that on its objective merits, there's at least one Game Boy Advance track that will rank higher in Snowland. And being that this is the remaining track from that game for now, Riverside Park is what I was referring to. And would you believe that like every Game Boy Advance track, Riverside Park has a very simple layout? Like, it feels kind of like a blob again, but, compared to the other blobby tracks, this one seems a lot easier to describe. You start by driving on a bridge, and it's the same style bridge from Boo Lake. So my graphical critique of the wooden Boo Lake, that applies here too, unfortunately. A right turn from there is going to lead you to a small sort of S-shaped straightaway, with a right turn onto another bridge with a trick ramp. You then have a left turn past a couple of patooies. They could either be blowing up mushrooms or I think it's mostly banana peels, but I think I've seen green shells too. But I know for sure they'll have mushrooms and bananas. But yeah, you'll go past them. That leads to a large left turn of a large left turn of the mud patch in the middle. And from there, this is why Riverside Park works the best thus far. Riverside Park goes for what I think Sky Garden was going for, but Riverside Park pulls it off. Kind of like Choco Mountain, there was previously just a loop with a couple of boosts and some jump pads on the Game Boy Advance. Well, in the Booster Course Pass, that loop is now a bridge, which leads into a small mountain with a waterfall at the end, where when you jump out of that loop, you jump you jump out of the waterfall to complete the lap. So it's kind of like that cave that was added into Chaco Mountain. That's the comparison I'm trying to make here. And on the whole, like I find this track layout nothing really to write home about outside of changing the loop at the end. Nothing was lost in translation. And that waterfall mountain, though, that I consider to be a pretty major gain for this course, because just having another loop that had a ramp on it, that'd be pretty lame. But without it, I think Riverside Park would have remained as like the truly unremarkable course that I thought it was in Mario Kart Super Circuit. Graphically, outside of the wood that I already mentioned, I think this is one of the best Game Boy Advance remakes of the past so far. I have a few quibbles with the graphics. I'll mention the wood one more time, since like just straight up ripped out from Bootleg directly. And I also wasn't a fan of how it looked in that track to begin with. But like from there, my gripes just kind of come down to the vines above some of the trees and the ropes on some of the bridges. Outside of that, I have pretty much no complaints. I think the water looks good, the road looks good, the grass looks great. Maybe some of the trees could use more variety in design, and I feel like the rock formations look mostly familiar, but they're not as overtly reused as in previous cave tracks. Like, is it perfect? No, but as I said, this is the best of the Game Boy Advance remake so far, and that means something. Musically is where things get tougher. I don't find the original Riverside Park song anything special. Really, between the two, like, I kind of have to split hairs, and I lean toward preferring the Game Boy Advance original for one reason, and it's the horns. I think the higher-toned horns, including the saxophone in the Game Boy Advance version, I think that works better than the instruments that were used in this version. And, maybe this is a stereotype for a jungle track, but I think they were kind of going for a Donkey Kong-style sound. And the higher-pitched horns on the Game Boy Advance, to me, they fit better with that idea of a Donkey Kong-esque track. But still, the music works in this 8 Deluxe style, and it sounds more unique, even if there is a clear inspirational template compared to its previous counterparts. And, I know I said I was going to place Riverside Park higher than previous Game Boy Advance tracks, but I surprised myself when I was writing these notes, man, because when I was writing them, I persuaded myself that it has to go even higher than I was thinking of at first. I was just going to place it somewhere in the C tier, and I guess this isn't really that big of a jump, but it is a whole extra tier. I'm going to be placing Riverside Park at the current bottom of B tier. There's a lot of improvements here from previous Game Boy Advance remakes, and I think it needs to be applauded. So hats off to Riverside Park for making a Game Boy Advance remake in the Booster Course Pass that I thought was worth it. Okay, DK Summit, also known again for PAL folks as DK's Snowboard Cross. This is yet another Mario Kart Wii track that, I did not know that it was apparently a beloved track. Don't get me wrong here. I liked DK Summit just fine, but it was no Maple Treeway. It was no Koopa Cape. And it was certainly no Wii Rainbow Road. But I liked it. I would play it. In my Mario Kart Wii days, I'd say DK Summit was in my track rotation, but it wasn't like a premier track that I had to pick every single time, kind of like the examples that I've just mentioned. But I do have to question why the Mario Kart team decided to have 2 games in a row with snow courses for DK, considering that Mario Kart DS had DK Pass, which had a similar idea, which, funnily enough, that would end up being remade in Mario Kart 8. So we have DK Pass, then DK Summit, then DK Pass is remade in Mario Kart 7, then now we have DK Summit being remade in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, so I guess snow tracks and Donkey Kong just kind of go together all of a sudden. Like other many mountainous tracks, DK Summit is a track that starts with a hard right turn toward a barrel cannon, and it shoots you atop the mountain to drive back down. when you land on the cannon, you can either enter upon a curvy left turn, and those will have the returning anti-gravity half pipes on both ends. And that's actually a feature I loved in the original incarnation of this track, and while I don't find the half pipes to be as effective here, they are still pretty fun. Following that are a couple of straightaways, one with a snow patch to the left to slow players down, and a large ramp on the right with a boost pad to trick on. That proceeds into the second straightaway, a little to the left with a bunch of tiny little bunny hills and some boost ramps to trick on. You then have a snake of narrow right and left turns with a pit on each side and a half pipe on the opposing wall of each. That leads to the final half pipe area with a couple of radical Shy Guy snowboarders before you land to one more right turn just to start all over again. And this is one of those tracks that to me, I've said it many times, but it sounds more fun in description, and clearly it really hits for some people. Like I said in the open, I don't find DK Summit to be a bad track, but it's not one of my favorite Wii tracks. I like it plenty, but it's not one that nowadays I really, really go out of my way to pick. Graphically, most of my critiques are pretty repetitious. The same Boo Lakewood appears at the start of the track. I think the rock formations, they look pretty samey, which in this case I think could have been improved by making them literally any other color than the same tan that's been used throughout this Booster Course Pass. And the trees, they're pretty generic snow pine trees. They aren't necessarily bad looking, but they could be better. They're pine trees. They don't look like really good pine trees. They just kind of look like pine trees. And man, I hate to bring it up again since it was the only example of a cave track I could think of last time, but I think this comparison is a little more apt here since it's basically Mario Kart 8's snow track, but man, I think DK Summit looks passable, but it doesn't hold a candle to Mount Wario. Like, modders out there, this is an experiment I really want to see. I want to see some of these tracks with other similar tracks, textures, and or models applied to them. I want to see every generic tree in this track, every generic pine tree replaced with Mount Wario's pine trees. And I want to see the rock textures from that course, put on the rock textures here. And I think I would think even more highly of this track in the graphics department if they just had better models and better textures, and it just doesn't have it here. It's just kind of like, it's good enough. It's sort of like the C's get degrees mindset of Mario Kart tracks. And then finally we have the Mario Kart Wii song remix, and this is one where I can clearly tell that it's a new version. Now, to be fair, I've been kind of harsh on the previous Wii tracks on the music front so far, but to me the change here is a pretty major one, where in the original version of the track, this song had synths. There's now guitars there, but beyond that, I feel like the two versions are actually pretty similar. Much like the way I've described the rest of this track, I think of DK Summit as having a good song, but not a top-tier song. I like it, but it isn't one that I would probably ever hear outside of Mario Kart Wii or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And I think DK Summit's going to get a similar rating to how I feel about the track, even when I consider its objective benefits. With those, it's only going to go like a couple of spaces higher than I'd like it to be, based solely on I feel, but not really by much. I am going to place DK Summit at the top of the B tier. And actually, now that I mention it, I think that term feels very appropriate for how I feel about this track. And though I would pick the two tracks immediately following it before DK Summit, those being Tokyo Blur and Sky High Sunday, I think DK Summit has more going for it than those two, which just that describes its placement. Yoshi's Island. Do I even really need to describe, do I really need to go through the whole song and dance for this track? I guess I wouldn't be doing my due diligence as an entertainer on this podcast if I didn't, but I'm going to go through it all. But I think it's pretty easy to surmise what I'm going to rank this track at. Pretty much everybody loved it. I loved it too. I think it's great. Like, all of this, aside from the Yoshi's Island series itself, is new to me. So we don't really need to worry about history. We're going to open on the track layout, which, to me, the track layout's actually probably the low point for this track. And no, don't understand me, it's not a death knell, but I think where Yoshi's Island mostly succeeds is on a presentation front with a good but not like mind-blowing track layout. You start under Yoshi's house, and then you take a snaky path past some stilt guys to a ramp that lets you jump into a pool of water. A left turn from there leads into a castle that's submerged in water, and then to another snaky straightaway through a short cave, and then a round left leaning bend up a mountain. At the top of that cliff, you're going to fly over a volcano to an opposing bend in the clouds, which then leads to a flight back down to the other bend on the main road of the island, back to the start. Now, additionally, that last little flight area contains one of the floating question mark clouds from the Yoshi series, and that can be run into to create a floating redwood path similar to the stairs that can be made from hitting those same clouds with eggs in Yoshi's Island. Though I will say that cloud, that's a really hard cloud to hit. I don't hit it very often, but I've hit it like a couple of times in my experience. And then if you do hit it and you take on that redwood path, you can pass through the goal ring that ends Yoshi's Island stage and start your new lap. And man, I like this layout a lot, but I've found I've been liking the complexity of the various tour tracks more in this DLC, although I have not liked writing them, because it's basically writing triple the amount you have to write for any other regular track that's 3 laps long. If there was 1 or 2 more sections in Yoshi's Island, including ones that reference like other level types in Yoshi's Island specifically, I think Yoshi's Island would equally impress in layout, but on the whole, I'm pleased with it. Again, I don't love it, but I like it a lot. But where things really ramp up for Yoshi's Island, it's the presentation. In the original Mario Kart 8 DLC, there were a handful of crossover tracks. There's the Zelda crossover, the Animal Crossing crossover, the F-Zero crossovers, Excite Bike. And while this track is a crossover with a Mario sub-series, as far as I'm concerned, Yoshi's Island got the same level of care and attention as Zelda and Animal Crossing and F-Zero for sure. It looks and it feels like Yoshi's Island in pretty much every single way. There's unique enemies that only appear in the Yoshi's Island series that make cameos here. Poochie's on the mailbox at the starting line. There's a giant Nep Inuit in the background just kind of hanging out. The coins are Yoshi coins instead of standard Mario coins, like how in Hyrule Circuit they're rupees, like how in Animal Crossing they're bells. Is there any other example? Like in Urchin Underpass, the battle course, there are these Splatoon coins. That's a great attention to detail that all the crossover tracks need to have. Like I said, the track, it starts at Yoshi's house and it's got a goal ring. That isn't to say everything's perfect. I think the cave section, I think that's got the most missed potential, not including some of the underground enemies there, but I would actually call that section probably the least graphically impressive. I think a lot of the rock formations, again, suffer from being under-textured. I think the wood for Yoshi's house is kind of similar, but, of course, if my greatest complaints come back to textures, I think this track did pretty well. Still, it would be great to see a graphical overhaul with some of these textures. I know it's not going to happen, but that's the only real aspect that's disappointing now. But adding to the great presentation, man, it's the music for this track. And I have to talk about 2 songs here. In line with the previous crossover tracks, Yoshi's Island has a song from its series that plays during gameplay, and then it has a different song during the results screen. The race song is just a Mario Kart 8 style remix of the athletic theme from Yoshi's Island. And to be honest, that's a song that I consider to be pretty overrated. Man, I'm just really flaming myself today with that and my Rainbow Road 3DS opinions. Why did I decide to do this? But I did it anyway. It's not my favorite song, but I would say this rendition might be my favorite version of it. Practically any song, in my opinion, it can be changed to have Mario Kart 8's jazz style, and it's improved by it. Now, that's obviously not the case in truth, because I've cited songs in this list that don't work as well to me, but Yoshi's Island is one of them, okay? And the results song, wow, I'm really mixing up my words here. The results song, to me, it's the one that shines better between the two. I happen to think the results song in Yoshi's Island is one of the best songs in that game, but this instrumentation, man, it takes it to another level. And so, like, if it wasn't obvious already, Yoshi's Island, it hit it out of the park. Like, remember when this wave of tracks was revealed, I specifically said that I was cautiously optimistic that Yoshi's Island it's going to be the track that finally meets base game Mario Kart 8 quality. And while I think I do need to eat a little bit of that claim, just a little bit, I think it comes super, super close to meeting that quality. And when I say I need to eat that claim, I mean, I'm like eating a cherry tomato size amount of that claim at best. Yoshi's Island, it's going to go in the S tier. It's going to go between Berlin Byways and Sydney Sprint. I enjoy this track a lot, but I just have more fun with Berlin Byways. Still, second place at this point when we're, what? Let's see, we had 8, 16, 24. When we're 32 tracks in, being at second place, that's a really, really good place to be. Especially when it's still got a major flaw. Really, if the graphics can be improved, it could have been the top tier track, but still, I think it still would have placed it as is because I just find Berlin Byways that much more fun, but that's just me. Last 4 tracks. Bangkok Rush. Now, I had some deja vu writing the notes that I have for Bangkok Rush because the way that I feel about this track is pretty much identical to that of Amsterdam Drift. I mean, honestly, I could have left my notes there and called it a day, but like before, I think I'd be doing a disservice if I, would have done that with Yoshi's Island as well. So we're going to get into some detail on Bangkok Rush. The first lap has players taking a straightaway toward a left turn of a wide, shallow pool with some boats to trick off of. And I think that's one of the many landmarks that Bangkok Rush has. Like Amsterdam Drift before it, I think the landmarks in Bangkok Rush are great, and they're likely representative of Bangkok as well. A right turn out of the water is going to lead to a subtle right curve through a produce market, and then a left turn leads to another section that I quite like. There's an upper route and a lower route to take back to the starting line. Now, ultimately, you have to drop off of the upper route by the end, but it's nice to have 2 options. The lower route, it's safer, it's wider road, but it only has single item boxes, where the upper path, it has a narrower road, and you need to drive up some narrow stairs to get on it in the first place, but you get double item boxes out of it. And then, of course, there's also the risk of just falling onto the lower path anyway. So, the second lap, that then takes players to the right from the starting line towards a flashier market. This one's like one with the restaurants and hotels. From there, players continue straight up a small mountain which bends to the right to a flight pad between a large gate and an ornate monument that I should probably know, but I don't know it. Sad. And then from there is another right turn toward a stretch of road with some boost pads that run adjacent to the shallow water from lap 1, so you're going opposite the boats from lap 1. One more right turn from there leads to the final lap, which starts in reverse from the others. A left turn then from the starting line, which is again in reverse. It leads back to the strip of shops from lap 2, only instead of taking the mountain path, players will turn left instead toward a parking garage reminiscent of the New York Minute one. It loops to the left to a trick ramp onto some bouncy tents. Short straightaway is then going to lead to one last right turn to the upper and lower roads from lap 1, and the same return to the finish line. So when I look at the map for Bangkok Rush, I want to like it as much as other tracks. And again, when I describe that layout, it probably doesn't sound that different from other city tracks, but like its counterpart as the first track of the prior cup, Bangkok Rush just doesn't hit for me. And if this wasn't enough second verse same as the first, I think Bangkok Rush is just as mixed graphically as Amsterdam Drift. I think it might just edge out Amsterdam because there's no models that really look like the bad tulips there. But some of the same texture issues, they're popping up again. I want to see more detail in the buildings and the landmarks, like the giant statues near the starting line. The same palm trees from Coconut Mall, they make a reappearance again. And those are my biggest complaints. I want to see more detail because I've seen plenty of tracks with that level of detail, but they're not here. I know you're sick of hearing me say it, but Bangkok Rush's song also makes me feel pretty much the same as Amsterdam Drift. it's a catchy song during the race, and though it isn't in the upper echelon, I have found myself thinking about the song here and there. Plus, it's got unique instruments not found in other tracks. Like the graphics, I think this song just edges out Amsterdam Drift, but not by very much. And so with all that put together, I guess it's no surprise that I am placing Bangkok Rush just ahead of Amsterdam Drift in the C tier. The frustrating thing with both of these tracks, though, is that I see more potential in them. I think there's more than the game really gave it. Now, maybe this is a complaint that's directed more at Mario Kart Tour, but I don't find the layouts of these tracks to be exciting in the same way that those two S tier city tracks are. Not every track needs to be it doesn't need to have traffic to be exciting, but or it doesn't need to have super windy roads, but I need some more moments of excitement. Mario Circuit DS. Now, this is a track that a lot of people weren't excited to see come back, and I can sympathize with that position. In particular, I know some I know some folks really wanted to see Airship Fortress return, especially because the data mine suggests that this is probably the last track we're getting from Mario Kart DS. And, I love Airship Fortress as much as the rest of them, but honestly, I'm not that disappointed in this Mario Circuit. In fact, I kind of find it in a similar position as Shroom Ridge. Not in that this track is one of my new absolute favorites, but that I consider to be a very unmemorable track from Mario Kart DS. As far as circuit tracks go in that game, I would probably sooner play Figure 8 Circuit, and that track's layout, it speaks for itself. It's a Figure 8. This track's layout, as you can imagine, is more complex than that. You start next to some stands on a straightaway, then take a right turn towards a winding straightaway next to Peach's Castle. That leads to another small wind with dirt patches and fire piranha plants and pipes. Straightaway through a pipe tunnel leads to a forest where you can make a bending couple of left turns to a dirt path now in front of the castle, ending then with a couple of hairpin turns left and then right back to the starting line. That forest area, I also want to point out, it's got a wiggler roaming around it during the third lap, and that's new. Now, of course, I am predisposed to like this track, given that it's from my first Mario Kart game. But even with this baggage in mind, I think I unfairly overlooked Mario Circuit in the past. This is certainly not the most interesting track layout I've ever seen, but I think this track shows the technological growth from the tracks in Super Circuit to DS. Art-wise, being that it was a DS track, the nostalgic child in me, the 7-year-old, the 8-year-old that first played this game, he's not a fan of a lot of the changes this track received. Are they huge changes? Not really, but to me, Mario Kart DS feels like it had a very particular style, and that isn't captured here. What we got was still good, and looking at it objectively, I think the more noticeable changes are for the better. Certainly, I'm obligated to mention that many of the same problems I've been decrying are going to pop up here again. The rock formations, they look samey. Some of the textures are underbaked. I feel like Peach's Castle, it doesn't look as good as it could either, and considering that Mario Kart 8's own Mario Circuit, its original one, also has Peach's Castle there, and it looks a lot better, yeah, of course this version's going to disappoint in comparison. Though, they do have totally different models and they're at different scales, but look, to me that doesn't change the lack of detail. I will give the team credit for modeling a new enemy, with including with new behavior, and I'm talking about the fire piranha plants. It would have been a lot easier to pick a track that doesn't require adding a new obstacle like them, so, some small points for that. And I like the new small forest area. In the original track, that was an area that was surrounded by a metal fence, a little bit of a stone fence too, which again, the kid in me, he really wants to see that there again, because that's how it was in Mario Kart DS, but on the whole, I think the forest is the better choice. One thing that is lost in translation with that section, though, is making it clear that the forest section is over the pipe tunnel. I think that was done better in DS. But at the end of the day, I see a lot of these, other than the standard critiques, as nitpicks. But the circuit music from Mario Kart DS, that was the first song in the series that I ever got to hear. So you can bet I was excited to see how it would be translated into Mario Kart 8, and I think the team remade it pretty spectacularly. Again, I'm predisposed to like the song, so it isn't too surprising that I like this version a lot, but there are ways it could have been messed up. I think I like it on the same level as the DS version, though. You know, they both follow the same tune, but the DS instruments sound very different from the new instrumentation, such that I'd say I like them both equally. Now, I will say there are extra flourishes in the new version that I like the trumpets going into the second verse and replacing some of the synths with violin sounds. So maybe you could say the new version just kind of edges it out, but on the whole, I think they're pretty equal. I'm going to be placing Mario Circuit DS at the bottom of the A tier. I think it just barely squeezes in, but I could be persuaded that it belongs at the top of the B tier. I like the track design, I like the art overall, even if I have some quibbles as usual. And the music, it's an equal to the original. There really isn't much more I could ask for in a retro track. And I suppose exceeding the original is really what I could ask for, but at the very least, meeting the original is what I want. And of course, while I have some objectivity in my ratings, there is some subjectivity to this too. So this track probably has a little bit of a nostalgia bump going for it. Second to last one, Waluigi Stadium. After 3 waves, and nearly the end of the 4th wave, we finally got our first returning Mario Kart Double Dash track. There's 2 tracks in that game that use this particular song, the one that Waluigi Stadium uses. And while I like Waluigi Stadium fine, I would have far preferred Wario Coliseum return. But, you know, I'm not going to be unfair to Waluigi Stadium. I've played it a bunch in Mario Kart Wii, and I enjoyed it there. I played it a couple times in Double Dash, but since it isn't a favorite track of mine, it isn't a common choice for me. And I get the impression, too, that Waluigi Stadium, it's sort of like a cult Mario Kart track. And what I mean to say when I say that is that I think it's a pretty beloved track by a small group of people, but they really like it. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Waluigi Stadium has a larger fan base, but that's kind of the vibe I get. Waluigi Stadium, it plays like many of the other motocross-themed tracks across the series. You start on a narrow straightaway with a hump that you get to trick on, and that's going to be a common theme. That's going to lead to a rounded right turn. A lot of the turns are going to be rounded in this track for wide drifts, and because after the next straightaway, which has, again, 2 more hills to jump on and a fireball ring in between the jump, there's another wide round turn with the option to take another instance of the anti-gravity half pipes to either get coins or an item, as well as a boost. Another small jump from there is going to lead to a taller jump ramp with a fireball ring and boost pads leading to a wide left turn or a patch of mud that you can mushroom boost through on the left. But on the outer wall of that wide round turn are a few coins, but generally, I find it advantageous to stay toward the middle. A brief straightaway with a couple of coins and another left turn is going to lead to the most iconic part of the track, which is the full half pipe. And by this, I mean it's a legit half pipe, like in DK Summit. And there's the anti-gravity boosts on both walls. There's giant wood piranha plants that move back and forth. One set, though, is now modified to be across from each other directly at a raised angle, where previously they were all like the second set of this track, where they're spaced one after the other on the ground. You can drive straight through the pipe, or you can trick off the half pipes a bunch of times. I think both are pretty fun, but I prefer using the half pipes. On the right side at the end of the half pipe is a new platform that continues in anti-gravity briefly, with a couple more item boxes and an additional boost pad. And that's a change that I can get behind because it's one that further incentivizes using the half pipe. But it is risky if you don't time it correctly. I've had many times where I've missed that ramp and I've had to go underneath instead. Another brief straightaway with the requisite hills for jumps leads to a right turn, also with a half pipe wall. But this one also has a short anti-gravity section to try to get onto. That one's a lot harder to get to. I can't get to it nearly as much, but it is there. From there's another right turn with a large jump across a gap and a fireball ring, which brings you back to the finish line. And I might not love Waluigi Stadium, but I can say for sure that the changes made to this version, except for one tiny little thing that I'll be discussing shortly, makes it my preferred version. I already preferred the Mario Kart Wii rendition of this track for adding the half pipes and the other half pipe walls, but adding those new, albeit short routes, does make them even more valuable. And I think this track just works better with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's physics, better than any of the prior incarnations, because it feels very frantic, which I like. Unlike, say, a Baby Park, it's controlled chaos. It's not just chaos. But I will say, I have noticed that despite the breadth of options, a lot of players do seem to avoid the half pipe, so maybe there does need to be more incentive to try them out. And I couldn't think of any other place to talk about this, but the change that I'm not so sure of, even though I like the speed in this track, it seems like you're slipping around here more than on the ice tracks. Like, I'm not sure what happened there, and it's not really that big of an issue, but it's just so strange to see me, taking wide turns, like I'm on an ice lake instead of in mud. So again, not sure what's up with that, but that is something that sticks out about this track too. And dare I say that from a graphical standpoint, Waluigi Stadium is the one that I have practically no issues with. And I'm serious on that point too. Like, the only issue that I can really see is that I don't really care for the scoreboard design, but that's more an issue I have with the way that the Mario brand itself is being portrayed recently. I don't like the text used for the stadium sign, the blatant reuse of stock Waluigi artwork, but if that's my biggest critique, I think Waluigi Stadium's doing something right. I think that this is a track that, so far, it meets the visual standard of the base game tracks. I'm sure if I really looked hard, I could find some things to critique more harshly, but they're really not coming to mind. The road looks gorgeous, the rocks and the walls, they look fully textured and uniquely modeled for a change. The lighting makes the late night motocross rally vibe pop. Me getting ahead in some of my words. And, the fences, they don't look lazily put in for a change. I really do like how Waluigi Stadium looks. The song, though, is where the mixed bag comes in. I really like this new instrumentation for Waluigi Stadium. I think that it is a song that translates really well to the Mario Kart 8 sound font. But I don't think it's really all that stadium-y, if that makes any sense. I think there's a certain vibe that the Double Dash version of the song pulls off that this just doesn't hit. And I think it's the lack of an organ. Had this version had a baseball stadium-style organ, I think it might have exceeded the original. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the song to begin with. It's a fine composition, but it's not my first choice. It's not like in my top tier Double Dash songs. So Waluigi Stadium, it ends up being another one of those tracks where I'm going to let its objective merits overpower my personal opinion. I like the track fine enough, but despite all the praise I've given it, it remains a track that still isn't one of my top picks. But I've persuaded myself when I wrote these notes that I need to reconsider that. And as such, I'm going to be placing Waluigi Stadium in the A tier between Mushroom Gorge and Paris Promenade. Finally, Singapore Speedway, the last track of this episode, and man, what a track to go out on, folks. If it wasn't going to be Yoshi's Island that made people excited for this wave, I think Singapore Speedway is the one that would have done it, because it is a doozy of a track. And this is also the last tour layout I have to describe for now, so that's good. I sincerely believe that was one of the major obstacles in me not really wanting to make this episode, but I've made it now. We're about the same length I was in, so much for making a shorter episode, I guess, but let's finish it off. This track starts on a short straightaway through a couple of small turns, past some palms and a couple of boulevards before you turn left towards a cannon, and that cannon launches players atop what seems to be a hotel or just some kind of large building with a shallow pool on top. Again, probably a distinct landmark in Singapore I should know about, but I don't know anything about Singapore, so yay. Darn my unworldly culture. But that very shallow left turn along the hotel, It leads to another flight pad off the hotel, through some rings, back to land, and that's got another left bend to start lap 2 on. Lap 2 plays out pretty much the same as lap 1 at the very start, only instead of taking the path toward the cannon, players take a right turn to a Chinatown area. And that slightly winding path leads out to a short right turn before crossing the road they first came from before entering Chinatown, to another flight pad where you can fly across to another building and continue straight ahead along to one more jump ramp and the start of lap 3. Lap 3 starts on a long, winding path with some conveyors that are going side by side. One moves forward and the other moves backward before dropping off to another little broad bend of some narrow road that then drops off at the landing point from lap 1, except instead you're going to turn left to a new flight pad toward like a giant stone lotus sort of looking statue. Again, probably a landmark that I should know that I just don't know. And then there's going to be some air gusts that you can boost off the Lotus, or you can simply fly through some rings again. Or you could drop directly to the road and drive after the Lotus. So one more right turn after that to a jump ramp where the giant cannon previously was. So who knows what happened to that cannon. That's going to lead back to Chinatown one last time, except instead of exiting there, you're going to take a left turn that leads to the finish line. So instead of going right, you go left. And I tell you, that is an engaging layout. And I love it quite a bit. But I don't know if it tops Berlin Byways. Like, that track is just engaging in what I consider to be an intoxicating way. But I tell you, Singapore Speedway, it comes really close to meeting it. There's no track so far that to me comes off as much like an adventure as Singapore Speedway and the Booster Course Pass. The section-based track, like Mount Wario, they give off that feeling too. Now, if I put my critics cap on, though, I do have to admit the graphics are the low point in Singapore Speedway. I like it a bunch, and there's a lot of elements in it that I think look great, but there's also elements that stick out to me as being weak. How about some of the strong points first, since I like to be negative out of the gate usually. I really like the lighting in this track. Setting Singapore Speedway in the late sunset start of nighttime, I think that was an ingenious choice. It sticks out because there's not a lot of Mario Kart tracks, if there even are any, that take that approach. And I also think while it's not a justifiable reason, I do think that this lighting could be useful to hide some of the less detailed textures. But that takes me to my big critique, which is that despite all odds, the buildings just don't look as good as they could. And I don't understand, especially at this late date, why, if the idea was to bring in all these cities from tour, why not make the cities look as good as possible? You know, because if the buildings are what you mostly see, make them detailed. The Coconut Mall palm trees, they're going to make another appearance here. That's what's in the boulevards during that first little section at the start. Instead of the more detailed ones at other places in the game. I also think there's some smaller areas with less impressive textures, but those are the big ones that stuck out to me. So it's a tough situation where I think on the graphical merits outside of the lighting, I think Singapore Speedway leaves something to be desired. But art style-wise, I like it quite a lot. The set pieces, they look really, really good, and they look brilliantly thought out. You know, I said this track feels like an adventure, and part of that is because there's a lot of distinct locales with models that need to go with them. You know, one of the areas in Lap 3 is the Helix Bridge, which, yes, I did look up, that's how I know its name. And though I think the Helix itself isn't textured the best, it's a very memorable landmark. Chinatown, it doesn't look perfect, but it's a very memorable location. Other tracks have these, obviously. In fact, Amsterdam Drift and Bangkok Rush have quite a few too, but I think Singapore Speedway has the ones that look the best. But if there is one area where I can vouch for Singapore Speedway with full force, it's in the music. No, Berlin Byways has got my favorite song of the DLC, and Singapore Speedway, it is a close second. It's that main techno tune that just sells this song's excitement for me. I love the piano bits at the start and in the bridge to the loop 2. And just to top it all off, the Chinatown section, it has its own re-instrumentation of the song. So if I didn't find Berlin Byways to just be a better song, for that alone, having those two instrumentations would put Singapore Speedway in the top music spot. And so as a whole, I consider it to be in that elite set of tracks. And it's going to now take the 3rd place spot in S tier from Sydney Sprint. That track did have an amazing run in the top 3, and it is still one of my favorites. But Singapore Speedway takes the ideas from Sydney Sprint and Berlin Byways, and it continues to expand on them. And we do have one last topic to cover before I end this list out, but let's just take a moment to pull up the final tier list for the video folks to see. And I'm sorry, audio fans, this is definitely a pair of episodes that leans better to the video version of the show. But if you want to stop at the video and look at the list, please do so. I understand. Describing this list is only going to be so helpful. So feel free to take a look at the list. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is the topic of adjustments. Some folks might be wondering now that I've completed this list if there's any spots that I would consider adjusting from here, from where I had the tracks originally in my notes. And I think I would adjust a few. The one that sticks out to me, actually, believe it or not, it's Snowland. I think when I compare it to the other courses below it, I would probably bump it up to the C tier. And I kind of feel similar to about Amsterdam Drift and Bangkok Rush, despite me just ranking them. I would want to bump them up a little bit further. And I also think it's possible that looking at the top spots that I might be letting the music overfactor in my ranking of some of those city tracks in S tier, specifically. But when I look at the other tracks in the list, I'm also not sure what else would overtake them in the S tier. But in the end, I cannot make these determinations yet because the Booster Course Pass is not done. After Waves 5 and 6 release, I'll probably consider some adjustments to these spots, but for now, these are the rankings as I see the 32 additional tracks thus far. So that's all I gotta say. Have these ratings surprised you? Some of them did for me. And I was the one who had to plan this out. So here's hoping that Waves 5 and 6 continue to improve on what's here. Please, folks, whatever platform you're on, do some kind of engagement. That could be a like. That could be a comment. That could be leaving a voicemail on podcast.spotify.com/pod/show/the COP. Pretty sure it is. I'll double check later, but I'm pretty sure I got it right this time without having to look it up. So please do that if you can. I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode. It's not going to be Mario themed. We're done with our stay in the Mushroom Kingdom. Thank you for listening in, everybody. This is Brandon Pudwell signing out.